Okay, next up are the major mechanics, right? So real quickly, I'm just going to show this slide one more time. We probably saw this already from when we were going over what Scraps is, but keep in mind these are the core mechanics. So these are mechanics provided to you that you can create gameplay out of or that you can utilize in your major mechanics. But let's go over some acceptable major level mechanics. All right, so let's go ahead and just put a few of them up on screen here. So we got exploding barrels, conveyor belts, pressure pads, force fields, springboards, and there's even more from this, right? This is just some examples, and even in the list, there's probably some that you can come up with on your own that still meet the criteria. The important thing about your level mechanics, and you're going to be choosing 2 level mechanics. First and foremost is that they are level specific, meaning that they are existing in your level, and if we were to pull out our player character and put in a completely different player character, they would still function and work the same way. All right, so we don't want to be having any attachments or additions to the player character, right? We don't want to change the player in any way, but just making level mechanics that the player can interact with. All right, so let's break down a few of these into further detail, right? So our exploding barrels, depending how we want these to function, could lead to different design results. So it's very important that you explain on your level design document how the mechanic is going to work, right? So here you can see as an example that we're using our core mechanics, so say the Grabnol in support. So we could have the exploding barrels being able to be actually picked up with the Grabnol, right? And then if they collide with a surface and they're moving at a certain velocity, then they explode, right? And then if the player is too close to that item, or if certain items of a specific material or a specific object are too close, they are destroyed or take damage, right? So there you can see how we're using the Grabnol as support to the barrels themselves, right? Same thing with pressure pads, right? So pressure pads could work in infinite number of ways, right? It's up to the designer to clarify how that mechanic actually works, right? So we could have a pressure pad that a specific crate needs to be placed on it, right? Or an object needs to be placed on it, right? We could have another pressure pad that the player needs to just step on it. And then from there, we could even break it down to, okay, if I'm stepping on it and I step off, is it still activated? Is it on a timer? Maybe you have a pressure pad that is checking for a certain weight. So you need to put objects on it to weigh it down to get it to activate. So you can see how the functionality of the mechanic could change the potential gameplay setup that we're going to make from that. So it's really important you explain how the mechanics function, right? Lastly, using the conveyor belts, if it's a conveyor belt that the player gets on versus a conveyor belt that the player just puts objects on it using the Grabnol, that's a very different interaction and could lead to a different level design. So really make sure you think about how you want your mechanic to function and then what the interaction is going to be from players. Okay, so here's a few unacceptable major mechanics, things I see often that we definitely want to stay away from completely. A good way to think about it is any permanent change to the player or the functionality of the core mechanics. So adding a double jump, right? This would cause us to actually change how the character controller actually works. And we want to avoid this, right? We want to make sure that this is consistent from level to level. Right? A jetpack, right? We don't want to give the player any additional type of movement or maneuverability, right? If you got hired by Naughty Dog to work on the next Uncharted, and now you're tasked with making level 5 of the next Uncharted game, and you've just decided, yeah, in this level I'm just going to give Nathan Drake a jetpack, that doesn't quite make sense, right? And we don't want to be changing that experience from level to level. We just want to be focusing on building something for that character. A grappling hook, same concept of the jetpack. Again, altered movement to the player, and like a skill tree or Grabnol upgrades or Grabnol modifications, things like that. Stay away from any permanent change to the player.